Chapter 4 in our textbook is about figuring out what a job looks like so that we can be more effective and more efficient when we're trying to hire to fill that job, and also so that we have a better understanding as managers of what the people should be doing who are filling that job. Through all of the sections of Chapter 4, the main one that I want you to focus on for practical application and for testing purposes is Section 2. All pieces of it, A, B, and C. This video is going to cover Section 2. I'll ask you to look at the rest of it, but focus most of your time for studying purposes on Section 2. The section starts off talking about a job analysis. And that wording is a little confusing, and it can be easy to intermix that with other terms that we're going to talk about in the next few minutes. But what I want you to understand about a job analysis, analysis is the process of studying something to try to understand it. So a job analysis is the process of looking at a job to determine what that job does and what's required to be able to do that job. And the reason that we do this, I'm going to refresh you on this or remind you about this later, but the reason we do a job analysis is to create a job description. So think in terms of the job analysis being the process that you go through a day, a month, whatever it takes to really study a job well, to find out what the things are that you do in that job, and then what we've got to find in a candidate to make sure that they can do those things. And the job analysis really leads us to three things. This is something you're going to want to be able to talk about for testing purposes. The three things are the job content, that is what the job does, the job context, the setting for or the environment for the job, and the worker requirements. That's what somebody has to be able to do that job well. So if we go back to the definition of job analysis, remember, it's the study of a job to figure out what it does and what somebody needs to be able to do those things that the job does. So that expresses itself in three pieces. The job content, C-O-N-T-E-N-T, that's the activities that the job undertakes. We would call that the essential functions. When you think about any job, somebody who drives down the street handling the trash, the essential functions are to ride on the back of the truck, and when it stops, to go over to get the trash container. In America, we call them hobos. That raises a lot of eyebrows in other parts of Georgia and other parts of the world, but the big plastic thing, bins with the lid that lifts up that you put all your trash bags in, we in America call those hobos. So the people come down the street in the big truck, it stops in front of my house. Somebody jumps off the back, runs over, grabs the handle of the hobo, brings it around, hooks it onto the truck, flips the lid back, hits the lever, and the little arm raises it up, and boom, 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 and it dumps all the trash out. And then when it lowers back down, the guy grabs it, rolls it back over to the curb, and puts it up. So the essential functions of that job, if you were doing a job analysis, you'd be saying, okay, eventually I want to hire somebody to do this. What is going to be done in this job? And then what skills does somebody have to be able to do that thing? So the functions, again, are being able to move carts from the yard out into the street, to be able to hook them up to the truck, to be able to operate the machinery to lift the thing, to be able to verify that it's empty, and to put it back. Those are the basic essential functions. Doesn't require a lot of skills or training or anything like that. So the job content is the essential functions or the things, the activities of the job itself. The job context, C-O-N-T-E-X-T, is the environment. So in that particular example, the environment is part of the day is probably spent at the headquarters, getting dressed, getting ready for the job. But then it's all outside. So you're working if it's snowing, if it's raining, if it's 100 degrees outside, the environment in which the job is done. And that is very expansive. It's not just the physical conditions, the climate, that kind of thing, but it also includes who the position reports to and who that position oversees. So this particular position reports to the director of environmental services for the city. It may oversee, the driver of the truck may oversee the guys who ride on the back of the truck, or may not oversee anybody. what authority there is, what the person, the kinds of people that the person would normally come in contact with. They may come in contact with homeowners. They may come in contact with pedestrians on the street or drivers of cars or whatever like that. Potentially, in case there are problems, police vehicles, ambulances, any of those kinds of things. It may come in contact with other workers at the sanitation services department and make this job may come in contact with, you can think of other things, maybe people at the dump or wherever, all right? And then the working conditions, the hazards, certainly one of the hazards is this, there may be stuff inside that hobo that's toxic, that's, what's the term in the hospital, the blood type stuff or syringes or things like that. All kinds of different hazards. Rain and other kinds of weather are hazards. Heat is a hazard. And then it also, the job context also includes the physical and the personal demands. Occasionally, the trash doesn't fit in the hobo, so there's stuff on the side of the road. You may have to pick up a box fan, or you may have to pick up an old swing set or something. So there is some lifting involved. And so those are the kinds of things in the context. Remember, the content is what the job does. It's the essential functions. Context is the environment in which the job is done. And then the worker requirements are the things about you that would make you a good candidate. So any kinds of knowledge that you would need to have, any kind of abilities that you need to be able to do, any kinds of, and that includes physical abilities, mental abilities, reasoning abilities, anything like that. So knowledge, skills, abilities, we call those KSAs, and then other things. So sometimes you'll hear that part of the job description called KSAOs, knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics. And then other kinds of credentials. Do you have to have a driver's license? Do you have to be able to operate a forklift? In a daycare, do you have to have CPR and infant CPR and things like that? So credentials and certifications. So the summary of all that, the job analysis is the process that we use to learn about a job, to see what it does and what somebody needs to be able to do to fill that job well. That organizes itself into three categories. The job content, that's the essential functions, that's the activities of the job context, that's the environment where the job is going to be incurring or engaging, and there's a number of things that fall into that category. And then the worker requirements, the KSAOs, and the licenses and things like that, education and so forth. So that's the framework for the rest of Section 2, sections B and C. That's what we're trying to find out about the job. Now, how do we go about doing that? How do we determine what is the content of the job, the context of the job, and the worker requirements for the job? There's three basic ways that we do this. And this is another part of the test that you're going to have in exam number 2. 3 ways that we typically go about doing the job analysis is through interviews. And an interview, as it sounds, is a conversation between 2 or more people where we talk with the people who actually do the job. So if I want to find out what a sanitation engineer, let's see, that's what the term that we're going to call this for payroll purposes, a sanitation engineer, the guy who rides on the back of the truck and gets the hobos ready. If I want one of the most logical, most effective ways of finding out what that person does or what that job is responsible for is to sit down and talk to the guy who does it. Hey, after you get done with your route today, hang around for 15 minutes. We'll pay you 15 minutes of overtime. We wanted to talk to you about your job and what you do, so we got a better understanding of what you do. You talk with the people who do the job. Now, for purposes of the test, you're going to want to know what these 3 categories are, but you're also going to want to be able to list some positives and some negatives. One of the positives of the interview is that it is face-to-face, And so there is the ability to make sure that we're communicating well. I ask you a question and you don't really answer it. I can kind of sense that maybe I didn't ask it correctly, so I can ask a follow-up. Or you answer it in three words when it really needs to be a paragraph. I can ask you a follow-up question. So some positives of the interview method is that it is face-to-face and that we both have the ability to ask questions and to clarify answers. One of the biggest drawbacks of the interview method is that it takes a long time. If I want to get I probably don't want to just interview one person. I want to interview 10 people and see how the stories line up. Maybe this one does something that one doesn't do. What are the common things everybody says? So it can be very time consuming to do 10 different interviews. And we only hear what they want to tell us. Think about that for just a moment. If I were to ask you what you do in your job, because I want to record this for posterity, you may not tell me some of the things that you don't like doing because you don't want that in your job description. A year from now, when we update your job description, that thing you don't like doing anymore is no longer in the job description. I don't have to do it anymore. So one of the drawbacks of the interview is that you might not remember everything you do, and you might choose not to tell me something that you do, or you might choose to tell me something that you wish you did, but you don't have the authority to. And if 5 of us tell you that we do this thing when we really don't, maybe that becomes part of our job. So interviews have a few pluses and a few minuses. The second way that we can gather the information is observation, where interviews are talking to people who do the job. Observation is actually watching them do the job. You can already tell one of the drawbacks is that not all jobs are easy to observe. If I wanted to observe the sanitation engineer, I'd have to get in the truck and ride around all day long. And if I wanted to look at 10 different people, that takes longer than an interview does. An interview may be 30 minutes or an hour. Riding around with folks, there's no way that I can ride for 30 minutes and then go back to the office because they've got to finish their route. Watching the people do the job does have some positives. Whereas the negative of interview is that you may not tell me everything, you may not describe it accurately. I can see with my own 2 eyes what you're doing, so I can evaluate personally what all you do and those things that you might not be able to really explain to me. Plus, I can, I can observe you doing things that you might not remember. If I just ask you, name me 10 things that you do, I can only think of 4. Well, if I'm watching you, I can identify 10 that you just don't realize are parts of the job. One of the negative things, besides the fact that it is very time consuming, is that typically research shows that when people are being watched and they know they're being watched, they act a little differently than they do when they're not being watched. So I might do something very quickly when I'm not being watched, but even though you tell me that you're just kind of collecting notes about what I do, something in the back of my mind says you're also evaluating whether I do it well or not. So I have got to step up my game and make sure I'm perfect. And that slows down the process. It changes the process. So observation has some pluses and it has some minuses, just like interviews do. The third way that we can gather information is through questionnaire. That's where we create a little form and we give it out to a bunch of different people and we say, answer these 12 questions and fill in the blank, check the yes, no's, all the different things. It can be online or it can be on paper. And again, it has positives and negatives. Some of the positives are that it's very quick. It doesn't take me long, unless I'm a very, very poor reader. It doesn't take me long to read through the survey and check some things. And one of the other positives is that once you finish this piece of paper, I can take it and I can put it in a file somewhere and I can come back to it next week. If I do an interview or an observation, the value of the information is only good as my memory or my ability to retrieve it later somehow. So a couple of positives for questionnaires. A couple of negatives is that it's difficult to guess all the questions that we need to ask. Where we had in an interview the opportunity to ask follow-up questions on a survey or a questionnaire, you don't have that ability. So if you don't get the question right, you don't get the answer that you want. They can be filed and saved and they're quick. Those are positives. Negatives, you may not ask questions correctly, or you may not ask a question that's important. You may ask a question that's not important, so there's no ability to follow up or clarify. So far in this video of about 14 minutes, We've talked about a couple of things that you're going to need to know for test purposes. Those are the categories of a job analysis information and some of the things that go in some of those sections. We've also talked about 3 different ways that you can collect information, and we've talked about some positives and negatives of each of those things. Now, back to something we said at the very beginning. Why do we do a job analysis? The purpose or the outcome that we desire from the process of doing a job analysis is to create an accurate job description. Now, at some point here, after you've looked over this material, you're going to have an activity of creating your own job description. And I'm going to encourage you to go to Exhibit 4-3 on pages 119 and 120. That's a great summary. In fact, in my HR staffing class, we have our students create a job description for a job, and the template that I give them looks an awful lot like what you see in Exhibit 4-3. As you create your job description for a job that you do now or have done in the past, I want you to look at all of those big categories and all of those A, B, C, D, E things and come up with something for each of those. That's a great example of what a good, complete, comprehensive job description might look like. Now, when we think about this in the real world, last couple of things that we want to talk about here from the chapter, and then a couple of things that are not in the chapter, but I want you to know for the test purpose. Some general format job descriptions exist. So if you're looking for a job description for a housekeeper, you can go online and you can find a pretty good one. But it's not going to be exactly what you require or desire in your job. Some special purposes job descriptions exist. So you've got a job that you think maybe you're the only one who has. There may be others out there, but they are maybe so different from your job that they're not worth a whole lot. Most job descriptions, whether they are general format or special purpose, have the same kinds of categories of information, and it's just the details that vary. So understand that while it's difficult to create a good job description, it's not impossible. And there are reference materials out there that you can use to get you started or to give you some ideas if you have writer's block. Now, a couple of things I want you to mention that you'll understand for test purposes now that's not in this textbook, but they're very, very important, I think. If you do a job description right, what's the benefit or the value of that? Well, there are 4 different groups of people that can gain a benefit from having a good job description. The first is that a candidate can know whether he or she should apply. A candidate is somebody who does not work for us now or is not in this position right now. If I'm interested in being the dean of the College of Business and Computing and I see a job description, I can look over it and go, yeah, I can't do that. No point in applying. Or I can go, yeah, I think I can do that. Maybe I will apply. So for the candidate who doesn't have that job yet, good overview of whether it's worth their time because they think they can do it or it should just be ignored because they can't do it. Second group of people that there's a value for in a good job description is the employees who do that job right now. They can have clarification from looking at that job description on what they ought to be doing. You know, you go through your job and you go, they keep giving me stuff to do and I don't think I'm the one that needs to be doing that. Well, with a job description, there are going to be some phrases like other duties as assigned, but the job description ought to focus on the things that this job does on a regular basis. And if you're continually being asked to do something that's not in that list of essential functions, there's a reasonable opportunity for you to say, you know what, if this is not in somebody else's job description, you really need to code it into something because it's not in mine. Not that I'm not willing to do it, be a team player, but it's keeping me from doing the things that you've told me I have to do. So employees have clarification on what they should be doing. The third group that there is value for is the managers because, number one, it's easier to assess the performance of somebody when you know what it is they're supposed to be doing. So you can more easily assess the candidates as they're doing the job, but also as you're looking to find somebody to hire for the job. If you know what this job does, it's easy enough to ask questions to see if they can do that job or not. So the managers get benefit because they better hire people, and then they better manage them once they're hired. Give good feedback. The last group that a good job description benefits is the company itself, because that good series of job descriptions can ensure that everything that needs to be done to make this company work is being handled by somebody. If I got a list of 40 things, I can look through job descriptions and say number 1's on that one, number 2's on that one, number 3 and 4 are on that one, number 5's on that one. Everything that's required is being done by somebody. So we can ensure that all the work that's being accomplished is being done by somebody. And we can understand how positions fit together to accomplish the overall goals and strategies. That's the highlights of Chapter 4 that I want you to understand. I've tried to do a really good job of pointing you towards the things you're going to be testing about. If you want to go back and relook at this, right at about 20 minutes, won't take you too long, but I hope that this gives you a good understanding of what job analysis and a job description should look like and why we do that. In both an opportunity to make you a better human being, a better manager, a better employee, but also to do well on that second test. That's it for now. See you later.